America uses 110 volts while 80% of the world uses 220. It has more guns than people. It spends double what Switzerland spends on healthcare per person, but achieves worse outcomes. It's the only wealthy democracy on Earth without universal coverage. And here's what makes this strange. None of it is accidental. America wasn't just different from other countries. It was designed to be their opposite. And the reason why goes back to a single sentence written in 1776. The Declaration of Independence contains one line that changed everything. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. This sounds obvious now, almost like a greeting card slogan. But in 1776, it was the most radical political idea on Earth. Every major civilization before America had grounded its legitimacy in something else. Divine right, hereditary authority, the raw power of the state. Kings ruled because God said so. Emperors ruled because their fathers had. Governments existed and people served them. America flipped this completely. The individual comes first. Government exists only because individuals allow it to exist. If you want to do something to me, you need my permission. If you're enjoying this video, subscribing helps the channel reach more people. And we've got a lot more ground to cover. Every weird American choice you've ever noticed traces back to this single principle. The imperial measurements, the medical bankruptcies, the 47 different sales tax rates, none of it is randomness. It's philosophy, hard-coded into infrastructure. And once you understand the principle, the whole country starts to make sense. But understanding the philosophy is just the beginning. Because the founders didn't stop at a declaration, they built a government specifically designed to fail. After winning independence, the founders faced an enormous choice. They could centralize power like Britain, efficient, stable, proven to work. Or they could fragment it deliberately, messy, slow, and completely untested at scale. They chose fragmentation, 3 co-equal branches, each designed to check the others constantly. A president who can veto Congress, a Congress that can override the president, a Supreme Court that can strike down both. No single person or group can act alone. But here's what most people miss about this system. It wasn't idealism. The founders weren't optimists about human nature. They were paranoid. They had watched the English Civil War tear a nation apart. They had seen the French Revolution's descent into terror. Liberty, equality, fraternity, followed by the guillotine. They had watched Prussia militarize into a machine that would eventually threaten all of Europe. History had taught them one lesson over and over. Given enough power, someone will abuse it. Not might, will. So they made it nearly impossible for any leader to consolidate control. They built gridlock into the operating system. The trade-off was obvious. A government that moves slowly, that struggles to respond to crises, that frustrates everyone who wants quick action. Americans complain about congressional gridlock constantly. But that gridlock is the feature, not the bug. It's working exactly as intended. And here's the remarkable thing, it worked. America became the first large republic in history to actually survive. Every previous attempt at self-government at that scale had collapsed into tyranny or civil war. Rome became an empire. Athens fell to Macedonia. The French Republic became Napoleon. America endured. But the 3 branches were just the beginning of the founders' paranoia. Their fear of concentrated power extended to something far more personal, your individual rights. And that fear produced the single most controversial feature of American life. Only 3 countries in the entire world have a constitutional right to bear arms: the United States, Mexico, and Guatemala. Mexico's constitution includes restrictions. Guatemala's includes restrictions. America's Second Amendment has none. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Full stop. The result is staggering. America has 120.5 civilian firearms per 100 people. That's not a typo, more guns than humans. The second-place country is Yemen, an active war zone with 52.8. Switzerland, famous for its gun culture, has 27.6. America has nearly 5 times more. But here's the counterintuitive part. This isn't because Americans are uniquely violent or uniquely obsessed with weapons. It's because the founding philosophy made individual rights uncompromisable. The principle overrides the policy outcome, even when the outcome is horrific. Every other wealthy democracy, after experiencing a mass shooting, restricted firearms within months. Australia did it after Port Arthur. The United Kingdom did it after Dunblane. New Zealand did it after Christchurch. America experienced Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland, Uvalde, and gun ownership remained constitutionally protected. The standard explanation is lobbying, the NRA, political corruption. But that's not quite right. The deeper reason is 1776. The founders believed that an armed citizenry was the final check against tyranny, the last line of defense if government itself became the threat. They wrote that belief into the Constitution's DNA. And changing DNA is nearly impossible. Guns are the obvious example of this principle, but the same logic explains something far more personal: why an ambulance ride might bankrupt you. Every other wealthy country eventually reached the same conclusion. Universal healthcare was morally necessary and economically efficient. Pool the risk, spread the cost. Everyone pays in, everyone gets care. Germany did it in 1883. The United Kingdom did it in 1948. Canada did it in 1966. Even Switzerland, one of the most market-oriented countries in Europe, has mandatory coverage. America is the only wealthy democracy that said no. The standard explanation is greed. Insurance companies, pharmaceutical lobbyists, politicians bought and paid for. There's truth to that. But the deeper reason is mathematics, and it starts with the founding philosophy. If healthcare is an individual choice, as the consent principle demands, then only sick people buy insurance. Healthy 25-year-olds don't want to pay for coverage they don't think they need. This is called adverse selection, and it's economic poison. When only sick people buy in, costs skyrocket. Premiums rise. More healthy people drop out. The system spirals. Single-payer systems work precisely because participation isn't optional. Everyone pays, whether they're sick or healthy, young or old. The risk gets spread across an entire population, but mandatory participation violates the founding principle. You can't force an individual to buy something they don't want, not without their consent. The result is economically irrational but philosophically consistent. America spends $14,885 per person annually on healthcare, nearly double Switzerland. And for that money, Americans get worse outcomes: higher infant mortality, lower life expectancy, more preventable deaths. The lived experience makes this visceral. Walk into a British NHS hospital with a broken arm. Show your ID. Treatment begins. Walk into an American emergency room with the same broken arm. Forms, waivers, insurance verification. Who's your carrier? What's your policy number? Sign here, acknowledging financial responsibility. Same medical problem, completely different experience, because of how two countries answered the same question 200 years ago. Healthcare affects life and death. But the founders' philosophy also shaped something you experience every single day, without ever thinking about it. In the 1890s, America fought its own internal war over electricity. Edison championed direct current at 110 volts. Westinghouse pushed alternating current. Edison won the voltage war but lost the current war, and America ended up with 110-volt AC power. Meanwhile, the rest of the world eventually standardized on 220 volts at 50 hertz. More efficient, better for long-distance transmission. The obvious choice. America never switched. The cost of replacing every outlet, every appliance, every transformer in the country was simply too high. So today, 130 years later, every American traveling abroad carries a bag of adapters. Every European visiting America discovers their hairdryer doesn't work. Trillions of dollars in incompatible infrastructure. Because of a decision made before most people had electricity at all. The same story repeats with measurements. In 1975, Congress passed the Metric Conversion Act, officially declaring metric the preferred system for the United States. 50 years later, Americans still buy gasoline in gallons, drive in miles, and measure their height in feet and inches. NASA maintains dual engineering standards because mixing up metric and imperial once destroyed a $125 million Mars orbiter. Medicine dosages confuse patients. International trade requires constant conversion. Every rational argument favors switching. Cultural inertia wins anyway. Then there's sales tax. Most of the world adopted value-added tax, collected at each stage of production, invisible to consumers. The price you see is the price you pay. America created something entirely different. Over 13,000 separate sales tax jurisdictions, state tax, county tax, city tax, special district tax. You pick up a product labeled $9.99 and pay $10.86 at the register. The tax appears at checkout after you've already decided to buy. This isn't just annoying, it's psychological. VAT countries don't feel their consumption taxes because those taxes are hidden in prices. Americans feel every cent. This makes Americans believe their taxes are higher than Europeans, even when they're often lower. The perception shapes politics, anti-tax sentiment that VAT countries simply don't experience. The cumulative effect is a country that functions like 47 separate nations duct-taped together. Each state has different rules, different tax rates, different standards. Driving from New York to Florida means passing through jurisdictions with wildly different laws about everything from speed limits to alcohol sales to fireworks. By design. But perhaps the strangest opposite isn't something the government imposes. It's something Americans enforce on each other, while claiming to value freedom above all else. On cultural surveys, America scores as one of the most individualistic societies ever measured, 2 to 3 times higher than most European countries on Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Americans claim to value freedom, nonconformity, personal choice, doing things their own way. The mythology runs deep. The frontier spirit, the self-made man, the rebel who doesn't follow the crowd. But try leaving an 8% tip at a restaurant. In Germany, you tip 5 to 10% when service is exceptional. In France, tipping barely exists, service is included, and small change is enough. In Japan, tipping can be seen as insulting, implying the worker needs charity. In America, 18% is the social minimum, 20% is expected, 25% for good service. Go below that floor and you're not just cheap, you're morally deficient. The server watches you calculate. The mathematical anxiety of "did I tip enough" legs and is uniquely American. It doesn't exist in cultures Americans would describe as less free. This is the paradox at the heart of American individualism. It's deeply, almost aggressively conformist. You're theoretically free to reject any social norm, but the punishment for doing so is swift and severe. Not legal punishment, social punishment, judgment, exclusion. The sense that you've revealed something shameful about your character. Tipping is just the obvious example. The same pattern applies to flag display, to patriotic speech, to dozens of unwritten rules about how to be a good American. These norms aren't enforced by the government. They're enforced by neighbors, co-workers, strangers, through peer pressure more intense than in the collectivist cultures Americans often mock. So what does American freedom actually mean? Not freedom from rules. Freedom to choose which rules you impose on yourself. And then freedom to enforce those rules on everyone around you. It's a subtle distinction, but it explains nearly everything about American social life. The tension is building and the questions are getting harder to ignore. Can a philosophy of hyper-individualism cooperate effectively on collective problems? Pandemics require coordinated sacrifice. Climate change requires global coordination. These aren't problems individuals can solve alone. But the founding philosophy makes collective action feel like an imposition. The consent of the governed is hard to obtain when the governed can't agree on anything. The political system is fracturing. The two-party structure held for 150 years, but polarization is accelerating. Can the constitutional framework survive when the two sides barely recognize each other as legitimate? The Second Amendment was written when arms meant muskets. Today, it covers weapons the founders couldn't have imagined. Where does the principle end? If America adopted single-payer healthcare tomorrow, would pharmaceutical innovation migrate elsewhere? American drug companies develop medications the world uses, partly because American prices subsidize research. Is that a trade-off other countries are free-riding on? These are genuine, open questions. Historians debate them, economists model them. Nobody knows the answers. The American experiment is still running, and the results won't be clear for generations. Here's what it all comes down to. Every American opposite, guns, healthcare, electricity, metric, tipping, sales tax, the endless maze of local jurisdictions, traces back to a single sentence written in 1776. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The founders weren't building a country. They were building an anti-country, a deliberate, systematic rejection of every solution humanity had tried before. They looked at empires and kingdoms and centralized states and said, we're going to do the opposite, on purpose. Even if it's harder, even if it's messier, even if future generations curse us for it. The contradictions Americans live with aren't flaws in the design. They are the design. The frustration, the inefficiency, the daily friction, that's the price of a philosophy taken to its logical conclusion. An American ordering coffee in Europe gets a 4-ounce cup. Espresso, concentrated, precise. In America, that same coffee comes in a 12-ounce cup with ice. More, bigger, individual choice, abundance. That impulse, more for me my way, isn't a quirk. It's the philosophy made physical. It's the consent of the governed, applied to everything all the time, without exception. For better and for worse, America was built to be the opposite. And 250 years later, it still is.